My name is Anna Durpov, and I want you to remember what I'm about to tell you. At 62, with silver hair that catches the light just right and pearls that have witnessed 4 decades of marriage, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal this world had to offer. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday evening in September when my 7-year-old grandson Tommy crawled into my lap while I read him his bedtime story. The house was quiet, that expensive kind of quiet you only get in homes built with old money and older secrets. My son David and his wife Jessica had left that morning for what they called a business trip to Miami, leaving me to babysit for the week. Babysit. As if I were some teenage neighbor girl earning pocket money, not the woman who'd raised David alone after his father died, not the woman who'd built the very fortune they were now so eager to inherit. Tommy's small fingers traced the pearls at my throat, the ones my late husband had given me for our silver anniversary. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice carrying that particular honesty that only children possess, "they didn't go on a business trip." I set the book aside, my pulse quickening but my voice remaining steady. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He looked up at me with those innocent blue eyes, my husband's eyes, not David's calculating ones. "I heard Mommy talking to someone on the phone. She said they went away to take all your money before you. He struggled with words too big for his small mouth. "Before I what, Tommy?" "Before you die and give it to someone else." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest, not heartbreak, but something far more dangerous. Clarity. I tucked Tommy into bed with steady hands, kissed his forehead, and walked downstairs to pour myself a glass of wine. The Bordeaux was from 1987, the year David graduated from college, the year I thought I'd raised a man of character. Standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the accumulation of a lifetime's careful choices, I let the full weight of their betrayal sink in. They hadn't just left me as a babysitter. They'd left me as a fool. But here's what David and Jessica had forgotten in their eagerness to claim my fortune. I hadn't built this wealth by being naive. I hadn't survived 40 years of marriage and 20 years of widowhood by being weak. And I certainly hadn't raised a son while running my late husband's business empire by being someone who could be easily dismissed. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden my husband had planted for me 40 years ago. The roses were still blooming, despite the season turning cold. Some things, I thought, grow stronger when others expect them to wither. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't plead or cry or try to understand their motivations. Instead, I would do what I'd always done when threatened. I would protect what was mine with the same ruthless precision that had built it in the first place. They wanted to treat me like a relic from a bygone era, like someone whose only value was in dying conveniently. Perfect. Let them underestimate the relic. I finished my wine and walked upstairs, passing Tommy's room where he slept peacefully, unaware that he'd just lit the fuse on a bomb that would reshape our family forever. In my bedroom, I opened the safe behind my wedding portrait and pulled out a leather address book that contained phone numbers most people would kill to possess. Tomorrow, I would begin the systematic dismantling of my son's future. Tonight, I would sleep better than I had in years because finally, I had clarity about who deserved my legacy and who deserved my wrath. They thought they were cutting me out of their lives. Instead, they'd just cut themselves out of mine. The game was about to begin, and they didn't even know they were playing. People see what they want to see, and what they've always seen when they look at Anna Durpov is an elegant widow gracefully aging in a world that discards women my age. They see the perfectly styled silver hair, the pearls, the designer clothing that whispers rather than shouts. They see a grandmother who bakes cookies and remembers birthdays. They don't see the monster underneath. That's always been my advantage. At 62, I've learned that beauty is a weapon most women abandon too early. I've kept mine sharp through discipline, money, and the kind of cold rage that preserves better than any serum. My skin is still smooth, my posture still commanding, my smile still capable of disarming men half my age. But it's what's behind the smile that makes me dangerous. I wasn't always this way. When I married my husband at 22, I was soft, trusting, eager to please. I believed that kindness was always returned, that family meant loyalty, that love conquered all the pretty lies young women tell themselves. Life taught me better. My husband died when David was 12, leaving me with a business empire I barely understood and vultures circling from every direction. His business partners tried to buy me out for pennies on the dollar. His family suggested I might be more comfortable in a smaller house. Even the country club questioned whether I could maintain my membership as a widow. That's when I discovered what I was truly made of. I didn't just learn the business, I revolutionized it. I didn't just keep the house, I bought 3 more. I didn't just maintain my social standing, I became the woman others came to for favors they couldn't get anywhere else. And along the way, I developed a reputation. Cross Anna Durpov and you didn't just lose, you disappeared from the circles that mattered. I ended marriages with a phone call. I closed businesses with a whisper. I made people who underestimated me regret they'd ever been born. But I was always careful to keep that reputation contained to my professional life. At home, with David, I remained the devoted mother. I told myself it was protection, keeping him innocent of the harder truths about power and survival. Now I see it was weakness. I should have taught him what happens to people who bite the hand that feeds them. Hey, beautiful souls. Before we continue with Anna's story, I need to pause and speak directly to your heart. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. This book isn't just about surviving betrayal. It's about transforming it into power. It's about discovering that your experience isn't a burden, it's your secret weapon. Anna's story is about to show us what happens when a woman stops apologizing for her strength. But this isn't fiction. This is a blueprint for reclaiming your life. If you're resonating with Anna's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe. We share these stories not for entertainment, but for education. Every woman needs to know that age is not defeat. It's graduation to a level of power younger people can't even comprehend. I remember the exact moment I decided David needed to learn this lesson. It was 3 years ago at Jessica's birthday party. She was showing off to her friends, talking about how old-fashioned I was, how I didn't understand modern life. She laughed, that tinkling little laugh she thought was charming, and said, "Poor Anna thinks she's still relevant. Someone should tell her the world moved on without her."
I smiled that night.
I complimented her dress. I gave her an expensive gift. But I also made a mental note. Jessica Walsh, soon to be Jessica Durpov, needed to be taught respect. I simply hadn't expected my own son to be standing beside her, nodding along with her assessment of my irrelevance. That's when I knew this day would come. The day when I'd have to choose between being the devoted grandmother or being the woman who'd built an empire from nothing. The day when I'd have to show them what old-fashioned really looks like when it comes with 40 years of accumulated power and 0 remaining patience for disrespect. Standing in my empty kitchen the morning after Tommy's revelation, I catch my reflection in the window. Silver hair perfectly styled, pearls catching the morning light, eyes that have seen too much to ever be surprised again. They think I'm finished. They think I'm just an elegant relic waiting quietly for death. Let me show them what finished looks like. The next morning, I did what any good grandmother would do. I made Tommy pancakes and listened to him chatter about school while my mind worked through the implications of his innocent revelation. "Grandma, why do you look different today?" Tommy asked, syrup dripping down his chin. Different house, sweetheart. Like when you're thinking really hard about something important. Smart boy. Too smart for his own parents' good. After I dropped Tommy at school, I began my investigation. Not the kind that involved hiring private detectives or dramatic confrontations, but the kind that leveraged 40 years of careful relationship building and meticulous record keeping. First call. Patricia Hendricks, my longtime attorney. Patricia had handled our family's legal affairs since before David was born, and her discretion was legendary. Anna, darling, what can I do for you? Patricia, I need to know if anyone has been making inquiries about my estate planning. Specifically, if my son has been in contact with your office. The pause told me everything. Anna, I can't discuss. Patricia. My voice carried the weight of decades. This is my estate. I'm not asking you to betray confidentiality. I'm asking you to protect your primary client. Another pause. David and Jessica came to see me 3 weeks ago. They had questions about succession planning, about what would happen if you became incapacitated. Incapacitated. The clinical term for what they were hoping would happen to me sooner rather than later. What kind of questions? They wanted to understand the timeline for probate, the tax implications of inheritance, whether there were ways to expedite the process if you required long-term care. Long-term care. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally. They were planning to have me declared incompetent. Patricia, I need you to prepare new documents. Complete revision of my estate plan. And I need it done quietly. Anna, are you sure? This seems sudden. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. My next call was to James Morrison at First National Bank, where the Durpov family had maintained accounts for 30 years. James owed his current position to a recommendation I'd made when his predecessor tried to foreclose on a property I was interested in acquiring. Mrs. Durpov, what a pleasure to hear from you. James, I need to discuss some changes to my account structures, particularly the joint accounts I maintain with David. Of course. What kind of changes? I want them closed. All of them. Today. The third call was the most important. Margaret Stone, my realtor and the woman who'd helped me acquire half the prime real estate in this city over the past 2 decades. Anna, please tell me you're calling with another investment opportunity. Margaret, I need 3 things, and I need them handled with absolute discretion. First, I want a valuation on the house. Second, I want you to quietly reach out to collectors who might be interested in some high-end antiques and art. Third, I need storage facilities, climate-controlled, secure, available immediately. Anna, you're not thinking of selling the family home? I'm thinking of a lot of things, Margaret. How quickly can you move? By noon, I had set in motion a plan that would systematically dismantle everything David and Jessica thought they were entitled to inherit. But this wasn't just about money. It was about power, respect, and the fundamental question of who controlled the Durpov legacy. I picked Tommy up from school that afternoon and took him for ice cream, watching his face light up as he told me about his day. This child deserved better than parents who taught him that love was conditional on inheritance, that family was just another word for opportunism. Grandma, he said as we sat in the park, are Mommy and Daddy coming home soon? Yes, sweetheart. They'll be home in a few days. Will they be happy to see us? I looked at this innocent boy, the only member of my family who loved me without calculating my net worth, and made another decision that would reshape all our lives. Tommy, how would you feel about spending more time with Grandma? Maybe having your own room at my house. His face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Could I bring my books? You could bring anything you want, sweetheart. Anything at all. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, I sat in my study surrounded by legal documents, financial statements, and property deeds. My husband's portrait watched over me from the mantel, and I could almost hear his voice. Anna, you're playing with fire. But some things deserve to burn. And some people need to learn that when you try to rob a queen, you'd better not miss. David and Jessica wanted to take everything I'd built?
Perfect.
When they return from their plotting trip to Miami, they discover exactly what everything meant and exactly how much they'd lost by underestimating the woman who'd created it all. Thursday night, 11:47 p.m. Tommy was asleep upstairs, and I sat in my husband's old study with a glass of wine and a list of phone numbers that represented 40 years of careful relationship building. Time to make the calls that would change everything. First, Patricia Hendricks, my attorney. Yes, I was calling her at midnight. Yes, she answered on the second ring. When you've been someone's lawyer for 20 years and handled their most sensitive matters, you answer their calls regardless of the hour. Anna, is everything all right? Patricia, remember that estate revision we discussed? I need it expedited. Complete disinheritance of David and Jessica. Everything goes into a trust for Tommy, with me as trustee until he turns 30. Anna, this is significant. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. How quickly can you draft the documents? If it's truly urgent, I can have them ready by tomorrow afternoon. Make it happen. Second call. James Morrison at the bank. I'd saved his career once. Now he could save my legacy. Mrs. Durpov? It's very late. James, I need emergency access to all accounts David has signing authority on. I want them frozen pending investigation of unauthorized access. Investigation? Has there been a breach? Let's call it protective measures. How long to implement? I can have it done by morning, but Anna, this will create significant complications for David. That's precisely the point. Third call, Margaret Stone. Margaret understood wealth in ways that went beyond buying and selling. She understood that true power came from being able to disappear assets faster than anyone could claim them. Anna, please tell me this is about acquiring something wonderful and not dismantling something precious. Margaret, how quickly can you liquidate art and antiques without triggering attention? If discretion is key, 2 weeks for the valuable pieces, a month for everything else. But Anna, your collection represents decades of curation. My collection represents decades of investment. Time to collect returns. And Margaret? I need moving services. Professional, discreet, available tomorrow. Fourth call. This one was to someone most people didn't know existed in my contact list. Harrison Vale, private investigator, former FBI, current specialist in making problems disappear legally and permanently. Mrs. Durpov. It's been a while. Harrison, I need a complete financial investigation. My son and daughter-in-law. Every account, every debt, every hidden asset. And I need documentation suitable for court. Timeline, 1 week. Budget, unlimited. The final call was the most important. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the politician, but the psychiatrist who'd helped me navigate David's teenage rebellion years ago, and who understood the psychological dynamics of family manipulation. Anna, this is unexpected. Elizabeth, I need documentation. Psychological evaluation regarding my mental competency. Something that would hold up if anyone tried to challenge my decision-making capacity. Anna, what's happening? What's happening is that I'm about to teach my son the most expensive lesson of his life, and I need to ensure no one can claim I wasn't of sound mind when I did it. By 3 a.m., I had set in motion a cascade of actions that would systematically strip David and Jessica of everything they thought they were entitled to inherit. But more than that, I had begun the process of demonstrating what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. I walked upstairs and checked on Tommy, sleeping peacefully in the guest room that would soon become his permanent home. This child would inherit what his parents had forfeited through their greed and betrayal. He would learn that family loyalty was earned, not assumed, and that respect for elders wasn't old-fashioned. It was survival. Standing at my bedroom window, looking out over the city where I'd built an empire while my son learned to take it for granted. I felt something I hadn't felt in years: anticipation. David and Jessica thought they were cutting me out of their future. They had no idea they'd just cut themselves out of mine. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, for the first time since my husband died, I slept with the satisfaction of someone who knows exactly what they're going to destroy and exactly why it deserves to be destroyed. They wanted my house, my money, my legacy. They'd return to find echoes and empty rooms, and they'd learn that when you try to bury a phoenix, you'd better make sure it's actually dead. Friday morning brought autumn sunshine and the sound of Tommy's laughter echoing through rooms that would soon be empty of everything except love and loss. I watched him eat breakfast, scrambled eggs, just the way his grandfather used to make them, and marveled at how pure innocence could exist in a world full of scheming adults. "Grandma, when are Mommy and Daddy coming home?" Tommy asked, swinging his legs from the kitchen stool that was almost too tall for him. "Sunday, sweetheart. 2 more days. Are we going to do something special today?" I looked at this child, really looked at him. 7 years old, with my late husband's eyes and a heart that hadn't yet learned to calculate the value of love in dollars and cents. He was the only good thing David and Jessica had created together, and probably the only thing they'd ever created without considering its financial implications. "Yes, Tommy, we're going to do something very special today. We're going to make sure you're always taken care of, no matter what happens." "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, sitting beside him and choosing my words carefully, "sometimes grown-ups make choices that aren't very smart. And when that happens, other grown-ups need to make sure children are protected." Tommy nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than his years should allow. "Like how you took care of Daddy when Grandpa died?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Yes, exactly like that. Except this time, I was protecting Tommy from David instead of protecting David from the world. "Something like that, sweetheart." That morning, we made our first stop at Patricia's law office. While she prepared the legal documents that would secure Tommy's future and eliminate his parents from mine, I sat with him in the waiting area, reading him stories and watching him color pictures with the same focused concentration his grandfather had brought to building our fortune. "Mrs.
Durpov."
Patricia emerged from her office with a stack of papers that represented the complete restructuring of everything I'd spent 40 years building. "Everything is ready for your signature." The documents were comprehensive: complete disinheritance of David and Jessica, establishment of an irrevocable trust for Tommy with myself as trustee until his 30th birthday, and provisions that would make any legal challenge not just difficult but financially ruinous for the challengers. "The trust includes protective clauses," Patricia explained quietly while Tommy drew pictures at the conference table. "If anyone contests these arrangements, they forfeit any rights to visitation with the beneficiary. If anyone attempts to manipulate or coerce Tommy regarding the inheritance, they face criminal charges." I signed every document with the same steady hand that had once signed my marriage certificate, Tommy's birth certificates, and my husband's death certificate. Life's most important moments often happen with nothing more dramatic than ink on paper. Our next stop was the bank, where James Morrison had prepared account restructuring that would make David and Jessica's Miami scheming irrelevant. Every joint account closed, every line of credit frozen, every automatic payment stopped. "Tommy, would you like to open your very own bank account?" I asked. His eyes went wide. "Really? My own?" "Your very own, with your very own money in it." We opened the account with a starter deposit of $50,000, more money than most families saw in a year, but just the beginning of what Tommy would inherit when he came of age. I wanted him to understand that money was a tool, not a god, and that it came with responsibilities as well as privileges. That afternoon, we visited the storage facility Margaret had arranged. Tommy thought we were going on an adventure as movers began carefully transporting 40 years of accumulated treasures to climate-controlled units across the city. Art, antiques, jewelry, rare books, everything that David and Jessica had probably already spent in their minds. Grandma, why are we putting everything in boxes? Because sometimes we need to keep precious things safe while we decide what to do with them. Are you giving them to me? I knelt down to his level, looking into those innocent eyes that trusted me completely. Some of them, sweetheart. The ones that will mean something to you when you're older. The ones that come with stories about your grandfather and the life we built together. What about the other ones? The other ones will help make sure you can go to any college you want, live anywhere you want to live, and never have to worry about money the way some people do. That evening, as movers continued emptying the house of everything valuable, Tommy and I sat in his room, now almost empty except for his bed and toys, and I told him stories about his grandfather. How we'd met, how we'd built our business together, how he'd loved this house and filled it with beautiful things because he wanted our family to have beautiful memories. Will Mommy and Daddy be sad that the pretty things are gone? The question was innocent, but it cut straight to the heart of what I was doing. Would they be sad? Or would they just be angry that their inheritance had vanished? Tommy, sometimes people care more about things than they care about the people who give them those things. Your mommy and daddy forgot something very important. What did they forget? They forgot that love isn't something you can put in a bank account or sell to the highest bidder. They forgot that family means taking care of each other, not waiting for each other to die so you can take their stuff. He nodded as if this made perfect sense, which perhaps it did to someone who hadn't yet learned to be greedy. Grandma, will you always take care of me? Always, sweetheart. That's what grandmothers are for. That night, after Tommy was asleep, I walked through the house that had been our family home for 30 years. Empty rooms echoed with memories of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family dinners that had once been filled with laughter instead of calculated silences. David and Jessica would return Sunday to find not just empty rooms, but empty accounts, empty inheritance, and the one thing they'd never valued: unconditional love, redirected to the person who actually deserved it. I'd saved the only thing worth saving from this family. Everything else was just expensive debris. Saturday morning arrived with the efficiency of a military operation. By 8 a.m., teams of specialists were moving through my house like a well-coordinated army, each with specific orders and absolute discretion. Tommy watched the organized chaos with wide eyes, not understanding that he was witnessing the systematic dismantling of his parents' future. Grandma, why are there so many people in our house? They're helping us reorganize, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to take everything apart before you can put it back together the right way. The art appraiser arrived first, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Chun who'd helped me acquire most of the pieces now being carefully wrapped and catalogued. Each painting, each sculpture, each carefully curated piece represented not just money, but years of my late husband's passion for surrounding our family with beauty. Anna, this collection is museum quality. Are you certain about liquidating? I'm certain about protecting it from people who would sell it to pay for vacations and cars. The jewelry specialist came next, evaluating pieces that represented milestones in my marriage, anniversary gifts, celebration purchases. My wedding ring stayed on my finger. That was sacred. Everything else was appraised, catalogued, and secured. Mrs. Durpov, the total appraised value is significant. The diamond collection alone represents. I don't need the numbers. I need the security. Meanwhile, Margaret coordinated the furniture removal with the precision of someone who understood that we weren't just moving objects. We were erasing evidence of 40 years of family life. The dining room table where we'd shared thousands of meals. The living room furniture where Tommy had learned to walk. The beds, the chairs, the accumulated comfort of a lifetime. Tommy helped by packing his own toys, treating it like a game rather than the demolition it actually was. He was too young to understand that his parents would return to empty rooms and echoing spaces where their inheritance used to live. Mrs. Durpov, one of the movers asked, "What about the kitchen items?" I looked at the copper pots my husband had given me for our 10th anniversary, the china we'd used for every holiday dinner, the crystal glasses that had toasted every family celebration. Everything goes. Leave the basics for the week. One set of dishes, basic cookware. Everything else gets stored. By afternoon, the house had been stripped to its bones. Rooms that had once showcased wealth and taste now displayed only expensive emptiness. The echoes of our footsteps sounded different, hollow, like the sound money makes when it disappears. But the most important work wasn't the physical removal of objects. The most important work was happening in banks, law offices, and investment houses across the city, where 40 years of careful financial planning was being systematically redirected away from David and Jessica and toward Tommy. James Morrison called with updates every few hours. All joint accounts closed. New accounts established under the trust. Investment portfolios transferred. Mrs. Durpov, your son will have no access to family funds as of Monday morning. Patricia reported similar progress. Estate documents filed. Trust established. Previous wills revoked and destroyed. Anna, this is comprehensive. David and Jessica will have no legal standing to claim inheritance. Margaret provided the final piece. Storage secured. Insurance updated. Collection cataloged. And Anna, I've had inquiries from 3 serious collectors. The market value exceeds our initial estimates. By evening, I stood in what had once been my elegant living room and was now an empty space with good bones and bad memories. Tommy sat on the floor in the middle of the room, playing with his toys in the strange acoustics of emptiness. It looks different now, he observed. Different how? Bigger. But also sadder. Sadder. Yes, that was exactly right. We'd made the house bigger by removing everything that had made it a home, and in the process, we'd revealed how sad it had become when love was replaced by expectation and family became just another word for financial planning. Tommy, how would you feel about making our home somewhere else? Somewhere that could be just ours. He looked up from his toys, considering this with the seriousness of someone much older. Would it have a room for all my books? It would have the biggest library you've ever seen. And a garden like Grandpa planted? Even better than Grandpa's garden. Then I think that sounds nice. That night, I tucked Tommy into bed in the guest room that had become his sanctuary in this house of empty echoes. Tomorrow, David and Jessica would return from their scheming trip to Miami. Tomorrow, they would discover what it felt like to lose everything they'd taken for granted. But tonight, I read Tommy stories about dragons and princesses and brave knights who protected the people they loved. Tonight, I remembered why I'd spent 40 years building something worth protecting in the first place. It wasn't for the money. It wasn't for the status. It was for moments like this. Quiet evenings with someone who loved me without calculating my net worth. Someone who saw me as grandma rather than as an obstacle to inheritance. David and Jessica had forgotten that family was about love, not money. Tomorrow, they'd learn the cost of that forgetfulness. I'd given them everything, and they'd chosen to see it as not enough. Now they discover what not enough actually looked like. Sunday afternoon, 3:17 p.m. I was sitting in my neighbor's kitchen, sharing coffee with Margaret Wilson and watching through her window as David's BMW pulled into our driveway. Tommy was upstairs playing with Margaret's grandchildren, blissfully unaware that his parents were about to discover the cost of betrayal. Anna, are you sure about this approach? Margaret asked, her voice gentle but concerned. There might be a way to handle this more diplomatically. I kept my eyes on the window as David and Jessica climbed out of their car, tanned and relaxed from their Miami plotting session. They moved with the confidence of people who thought they'd solved a problem, people who believed they'd successfully maneuvered around an obstacle. Margaret, diplomacy is for people who respect boundaries. My son and his wife crossed a line when they decided to plan my obsolescence. David was using his key, Jessica close behind him carrying shopping bags filled with what were probably celebratory purchases made with credit cards they assumed I'd be paying off posthumously. I watched them push open the front door. Watched David call out, "Mom, we're home." The silence that followed was perfect. From Margaret's kitchen window, I could see them through the large windows of what used to be my living room. David appeared first, stopped in the doorway, his expression shifting from expectation to confusion to something approaching panic. Jessica bumped into him from behind, then stepped around him, her mouth falling open as she took in the vast emptiness where our family life used to live. "What the hell?" Jessica's voice carried across the driveway. They moved through the house like people in a nightmare, their footsteps echoing in rooms that had been stripped to their architectural bones. I could see them through different windows as they progressed. David in the dining room where our antique table used to sit, Jessica in the living room where 40 years of collected art used to hang. The beauty of it was the silence. No alarms, no broken glass, no signs of theft or violence. Just absence. Just the quiet statement that everything they'd planned to inherit had simply disappeared. My phone buzzed. David calling. "Hello, sweetheart. How was Miami?" "Mom, what the hell happened to the house? Where is everything?" "What do you mean?" "I mean the house is empty. The furniture, the art, your jewelry. Where is it all?" I let the silence stretch, watching through the window as he paced in what used to be our family room, his free hand running through his hair in the gesture he'd used since childhood when he was frustrated. I moved some things into storage. "Some things?" "Mom, you moved everything into storage. The house looks like it's been robbed." "Funny you should use that word, David." Another pause. I could see Jessica in the background, frantically opening cabinets and closets, looking for something, anything, that might still hold value. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening here. Why would you?" "David, when did you last check your bank account?" The silence stretched longer this time. Through the window, I watched him pull out his phone, watched his face change as he accessed the banking app, watched the blood drain from his features as he discovered that the joint accounts he'd been using to fund his lifestyle had been closed. "The accounts are frozen," he said finally.
No, sweetheart.
"The accounts are closed. Permanently." "You can't do that. I have checks outstanding, automatic payments." "Then I suggest you call your bank and make arrangements to cover them with your own money." Jessica had moved into the kitchen, and I could see her frantically opening drawers that contained nothing but echoing space. Her voice carried across the driveway. "David, even the silverware is gone." "Mom." David's voice was tight with barely controlled panic now. "We need to talk. Face to face. Right now." "I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment." "What do you mean it's not possible? Where are you?" "I'm taking care of Tommy. Speaking of which, he told me the most interesting story about why you and Jessica really went to Miami." The silence this time was complete. Through the window, I could see David standing frozen in the middle of the empty living room, Jessica beside him, both of them looking like people who'd just realized they'd stepped into quicksand. "Mom, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, David. I'm sure you have a very creative explanation for why you told my grandson that you were going away to take all my money before I died." He misunderstood. Did he misunderstand your meetings with my lawyer? Did he misunderstand your meetings with my banker? Did he misunderstand your research into having me declared incompetent? Each question hit like a physical blow. I could see David's posture changing, his confidence crumbling as he realized that his careful planning had not been as secret as he'd thought. "Where is Tommy?" Jessica's voice, sharp and demanding. Tommy is safe. Tommy is with someone who loves him without calculating his inheritance value. He's our son. Yes, I agreed calmly, he is. And you used him as bait while you plotted to steal his grandmother's inheritance. What kind of parents does that make you? Through the window, I watched Jessica grab David's arm, watched them have an urgent whispered conversation. Then David was back on the phone. Mom, whatever you think we were doing. I don't think anything, David. I know exactly what you were doing because I have documentation. Financial records, legal consultations, even recorded conversations. Did you really think you could plot against me in my own house without me finding out? This was a bluff. I had no recorded conversations, but the panic in David's voice told me it had landed. We wouldn't. You wouldn't what? Wouldn't meet with my attorney to discuss probate timelines? Wouldn't meet with my banker to understand inheritance tax implications? Wouldn't research legal procedures for having elderly parents declared incompetent? Each accusation was met with silence because each accusation was true. This is insane, Jessica's voice shouting now. She can't just steal everything. Steal? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Jessica, dear, you can't steal what already belongs to you. This is my house, my money, my property. I haven't stolen anything. I've simply rearranged my priorities. What do you want? David's voice was defeated now. What do you want us to do? I want you to understand something very important, David. You spent your childhood taking my love for granted. You spent your adult life taking my financial support for granted. And now you are planning to spend my declining years taking my death for granted. Through the window, I could see them both slumped in the empty living room, the weight of their miscalculation finally settling on their shoulders. But here's what you forgot, I continued, my voice steady and cold. I didn't build this fortune by being stupid. I didn't survive 40 years of widowhood by being weak. And I didn't raise you alone by being someone who could be easily disposed of when convenient. Mom, please. I'm not finished. You wanted everything I'd built?
Perfect.
Now you have exactly what you earned. Nothing. The house you're sitting in? It's being sold. The money you thought you'd inherit? It's going to Tommy's education fund. The business empire you plan to liquidate? It's being donated to charity in your grandfather's name. I could hear Jessica crying now, the sound carrying across the driveway like wind through empty rooms. You can't do this to us, David whispered. I didn't do this to you, sweetheart. You did this to yourselves when you decided I was worth more dead than alive. I hung up the phone and sat back in Margaret's kitchen chair, watching through the window as my son and his wife confronted the reality of their choices. They sat in the empty living room for another hour, making phone calls, arguing with each other, occasionally walking through the house, as if hoping to find something they'd missed. But there was nothing to miss. I'd been thorough. Tommy came downstairs around 5 o'clock, asking if we could go home now. I looked at this innocent child who had no idea that his confession had triggered the complete destruction of his parents' future. Actually, Tommy, how would you feel about staying here with Margaret tonight? We could have a sleepover, and tomorrow we'll go look at some new houses. New houses. I think it's time for us to start fresh somewhere. Somewhere that's just ours. Through the window, I watched David and Jessica finally leave, their car pulling out of the driveway like a funeral procession. They'd return tomorrow, probably with lawyers, certainly with demands and threats and accusations. But it was too late for all of that. I'd moved faster, planned better, and most importantly, I'd understood something they'd forgotten. Family isn't about blood or shared DNA. Family is about loyalty, love, and choosing to protect each other instead of exploit each other. They'd chosen exploitation. I'd chosen protection. The difference between those choices was currently sitting in an empty house with no furniture, no money, and no future they'd planned for. I'd given them exactly what they'd given me. Nothing. Monday morning brought lawyers. 3 of them, to be precise, following David and Jessica like expensive shadows as they marched up to Margaret's front door where Tommy and I were having breakfast and watching cartoons. I'd been expecting this. When you systematically dismantle someone's entire expected future, they tend to respond with legal threats and dramatic confrontations. I'd prepared accordingly. Mrs. Durpov, the lead attorney, began as Margaret reluctantly let them into her living room. I'm Jonathan Hayes, representing David and Jessica Durpov. We need to discuss the illegal transfer of assets that occurred over the weekend. I adjusted my pearls and smiled the smile that had once made grown men reconsider hostile takeover bids. I'm not sure what you mean by illegal, Mr. Hayes. Perhaps you could be more specific? You transferred assets worth millions of dollars without proper notice to beneficiaries. I transferred my own assets, I interrupted gently, which I am legally entitled to do with or without notice to anyone. David stepped forward, his face red with frustration and embarrassment. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just.
David.
My voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years making men twice his size back down from bad decisions. You will not raise your voice in Margaret's home. You will not make demands. And you will remember that I am still your mother, even if you've forgotten how to be my son. Jessica pushed past the lawyers, her carefully controlled facade finally cracking. You vindictive old bitch. You can't steal our inheritance. The silence that followed was profound. Even Tommy looked up from his cartoons, sensing the shift in the room's temperature. I stood slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled, and walked until I was standing directly in front of Jessica. At 62, I still had 2 inches on her and 40 years more experience in dealing with people who mistook kindness for weakness. Jessica, I said quietly, you just made a mistake. What mistake? You just called me old and vindictive in front of witnesses, including your son. You just admitted that you considered my assets to be your inheritance while I'm still alive. And most importantly, you just demonstrated exactly why you deserve nothing. I turned to Tommy, who was watching this adult drama with wide, confused eyes. Tommy, sweetheart, would you go upstairs and play with Margaret's grandchildren? The grown-ups need to have a conversation. After he left, I turned back to the assembled legal team and my estranged family members. Now then, let's discuss what's actually happening here. Mr. Hayes, your clients hired you under false pretenses. They told you I'd stolen assets that belonged to them. But those assets never belonged to them. They belonged to me, as evidenced by 40 years of tax returns, property deeds, and legal documentation. Mrs. Durpov, while technically legal, the timing and manner of these transfers suggests. Mr. Hayes, are you suggesting that a woman of sound mind doesn't have the right to dispose of her property as she sees fit? The lawyer hesitated. This was the trap I'd set, and he was walking directly into it. If you're questioning my mental competency, I continued, I have current psychological evaluations from Dr. Elizabeth Warren. Would you like to see them? I produced the documents Dr. Warren had prepared, comprehensive evaluations that established not only my mental competency, but my superior cognitive function for my age group. Furthermore, I continued, enjoying the way their confidence was evaporating, I have documentation of your client's attempts to manipulate my estate planning, meetings with my attorney, consultations with my banker, research into legal procedures for having elderly parents declared incompetent. David's face went pale. How did I know? David, I've been protecting this family's assets since before you could walk. Did you really think you could plot against me without me finding out? I walked to Margaret's window and looked across at the house where I'd raised David, the house where he'd learned to walk and talk and apparently to scheme against the woman who'd given him everything. You want to know what's vindictive? I asked, turning back to face them. Vindictive is a son who looks at his mother and sees nothing but an obstacle to inheritance. Vindictive is a daughter-in-law who calls the woman who welcomed her into the family expired. Vindictive is using a 7-year-old child as camouflage while you plot to steal his grandmother's life savings. We weren't stealing, David started. You were planning to have me declared incompetent so you could access my assets while I was still alive, I said flatly. What would you call that? The room fell silent except for the sound of Jessica's sniffling and the lawyers shuffling through papers they were realizing couldn't help them. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to leave Margaret's house. You're going to return to your empty home. You're going to figure out how to pay your bills with money you actually earned instead of money you inherited. And you're going to learn to live with the consequences of treating family like a business opportunity. What about Tommy? Jessica demanded. What about him? He's our son. You can't just take him. I'm not taking him. I'm protecting him. From parents who taught him that love is conditional on inheritance. From parents who used him as a prop in their scheming. From parents who prioritized money over family. I pulled out one more document, this one from Child Protective Services, documenting concerns about Tommy's emotional welfare in a home where financial stress had created an unstable environment. Mrs. Durpov has been granted temporary guardianship pending a full custody evaluation, the CPS worker had written. The child expressed feeling safer and more secure in his grandmother's care. This is insane, David said, but his voice lacked conviction now. He was beginning to understand the scope of what I'd accomplished in just a few days. What's insane, I replied, is a 38-year-old man who's never earned an honest dollar in his life acting entitled to his mother's fortune. What's insane is spending your inheritance before the person dies. What's insane is forgetting that the woman who built everything you wanted to take is still very much alive and still very much in control. The lawyers were already backing toward the door, recognizing a losing battle when they saw one. Mrs. Durpov, Mr. Hayes said carefully, if your clients wish to pursue this matter. Mr. Hayes, I interrupted, your clients have no matter to pursue. They have no legal standing, no legitimate claim, and no case. What they have is a very expensive lesson in why you shouldn't try to rob someone who's smarter, more experienced, and significantly more ruthless than you are. After they left, Margaret and I sat in her kitchen while Tommy played upstairs, blissfully unaware that his entire life had just been restructured. Anna, Margaret said gently, are you sure this was the only way? I looked across at the empty house that had once been filled with love and laughter, now echoing with nothing but broken dreams and expensive mistakes. Margaret, some people can be taught through conversation. Others require more dramatic instruction. My son and his wife chose to ignore every gentle lesson life tried to teach them about respect, gratitude, and family loyalty. And now they get to learn the hard way what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Through the window, I could see them loading boxes into their car, probably packing up whatever few personal items I'd left behind. Soon they'd be gone, and the house would be truly empty, waiting for new owners who might fill it with genuine love instead of calculated greed. I'd lost a son and gained clarity. I'd lost a daughter-in-law and gained peace. I'd lost the illusion of family and gained the reality of love. Tommy was upstairs, safe and secure, learning that family meant protection rather than exploitation. That was a trade I'd make every time. 6 weeks later, I sat in my new home, a beautiful colonial in the next town over, with a library Tommy loved and a garden we were planning together, reading the social pages of the local newspaper with something approaching satisfaction. The headlines told the story better than I ever could. Local couple files for bankruptcy following family dispute. Durpov estate sale draws unprecedented interest from collectors. Child custody battle ends with grandmother awarded full guardianship. But the real story was in the details. The whispered conversations at country club luncheons, the suddenly returned phone calls, the social invitations that stopped coming. David and Jessica had discovered something important about borrowed wealth. When it disappears, so do the people who were only interested in what it could provide. Margaret Stone had kept me updated on their decline with the matter-of-fact reporting of someone who'd witnessed the rise and fall of many local fortunes. David's had to take a job, she reported over coffee in my new kitchen. Sales position at a car dealership. Jessica's working at a boutique downtown, not managing, just sales. How are they adjusting? Poorly. Very poorly. There was an incident at the country club last week. Jessica apparently had a moment when her membership was revoked for non-payment of dues. I could picture it. Jessica, who'd built her entire identity around her association with wealth she'd never earned, discovering that without money, social standing evaporates like morning frost. What kind of moment? The kind that involves security being called and very public tears. She kept screaming that it wasn't fair, that the money should have been hers. Should have been hers. Even in their downfall, they couldn't understand that wealth isn't inherited automatically. It's earned, built, and protected by people who understand its value. And David, drinking heavily. He came by the old house last week, tried to get the new owners to let him in. Said he'd forgotten something important. What had he forgotten? I don't think it was an object, Anna. I think he was looking for something he could never get back. The old house had sold quickly to a young family with small children who saw it as a fresh start rather than an empty shell. I'd watched from my new front porch as they moved in, carrying boxes full of hopes instead of disappointments, filling rooms with laughter instead of echoes. Tommy adjusted to our new life with the resilience of childhood and the wisdom of someone who'd learned early to distinguish between people who loved him and people who used him. "Grandma," he said one evening as we worked in our garden, "do you miss Mommy and Daddy?" The question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that love isn't unconditional, that sometimes protecting someone means cutting them out of your life? I miss the people I thought they were, I answered honestly. But I don't miss the people they chose to become. Do they miss us? This was harder. Because despite everything, I knew David missed the security I'd provided, the safety net he'd taken for granted. Jessica missed the lifestyle she'd never earned but had grown to expect. But did they miss us as people, or just as sources of money and convenience? I think they miss what we could give them more than they miss who we are. Tommy considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. That's sad. Yes, sweetheart. It is very sad. The custody hearing had been swift and decisive. David and Jessica had arrived with a legal aid lawyer who was clearly outmatched by the team I'd assembled. The evidence was overwhelming: financial irresponsibility, emotional manipulation, using their child as a pawn in inheritance schemes. The judge's words were precise and damning. The court finds that the minor child's best interests are served by remaining in the custody of his maternal grandmother, who has demonstrated both the financial stability and emotional commitment necessary to provide appropriate care. David had broken down crying in the courtroom. Not from grief, I realized, but from the final understanding that he'd lost everything. Money, status, respect, and now his son, through his own choices. Jessica had simply walked out halfway through the proceedings. Now, sitting in my new kitchen with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that looked out on a garden Tommy and I were building together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Before we reach the conclusion of Anna's remarkable journey, I want to address something crucial. If you're watching this story and seeing yourself in Anna's situation, if you've been underestimated, dismissed, or taken for granted because of your age, I need you to understand something. Your experience is your power. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, isn't just about surviving betrayal or fighting back against injustice. It's about understanding that Every year of your life has taught you something valuable about strength, wisdom, and survival. Anna didn't win because she was ruthless. She won because she was prepared. The strategies in our book will show you how to protect yourself, how to recognize manipulation before it destroys you, and how to build a life so secure that toxic people can't touch it. Click the link in the description box and start reading today. And please, if Anna's story has moved you, subscribe to her true stories. Share this video with women who need to understand that being older doesn't mean being powerless. It means being dangerous in all the right ways. My phone rang as I was preparing dinner. David's number, which I'd kept active but had been ignoring for weeks. This time, I answered. "Hello, David." "Mom." His voice was broken, hollow. We need help." "What kind of help?" "Money. Just enough to get back on our feet. I'll pay you back, I promise. I'll do whatever you want." I looked out at Tommy, who was in the garden with his new friend from next door, both of them laughing as they chased butterflies between the rose bushes. "David," I said gently, "what you need isn't money. What you need is to learn how to live without expecting other people to solve your problems." "Mom, please. I'm your son." "Yes," I agreed. "You are. And I raised you to be better than this." "I can change. We can change."
Perhaps you can.
"But that change has to come from you, not from my money solving your problems again." The silence stretched between us, filled with 40 years of love, disappointment, hope, and finality. "I love you, David. I will always love you. But I will never again mistake enabling your poor choices for helping you grow." I hung up and walked outside to join Tommy in the garden, where real growth was happening in soil we'd prepared together, in sunshine that belonged to both of us, in a future that was built on love instead of expectation. Some flowers bloom best after the weeds are pulled. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen making Tommy's lunch for his first day at his new school, listening to him chatter about meeting new friends and whether his teacher would like the apple he'd picked from our tree. At 63, I'd learned something important. Starting over isn't about abandoning everything you've built. It's about building something better with the lessons you've learned. Our new house had become a home in ways the old one never had. Every piece of furniture was chosen for comfort rather than status. Every room was designed for living rather than impressing. The art on our walls told stories of places we'd visited together rather than displaying wealth for others to envy. Tommy had grown 3 inches and gained the confidence that comes from knowing he's loved unconditionally. His laughter-filled rooms that had never heard the calculated silences of people planning each other's obsolescence. "Grandma, will you pick me up from school today?" "Of course, sweetheart. We'll stop for ice cream, and you can tell me everything you learned." Everything. Everything you want to share. This was the difference between love and control, between family and financial planning. Tommy shared what he wanted to share because he trusted me, not because he feared the consequences of disappointing me. After dropping him off, I drove past our old neighborhood. The house had been completely transformed by its new owners, painted a cheerful yellow instead of the serious gray David had preferred, with toys scattered across a lawn that had once been manicured into sterile perfection. I felt no nostalgia for what we'd lost, only satisfaction for what we'd escaped. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Stone. "Thought you'd want to know. David and Jessica are getting divorced." She filed papers yesterday citing financial incompatibility. Financial incompatibility. The clinical term for what happens when people who've never loved each other for anything except money run out of money. I wasn't surprised. Their marriage had been built on shared greed rather than shared values. When the greed was no longer profitable, there was nothing left to hold them together. Another text arrived from Patricia Hendricks. "Tommy's trust fund has grown by 12% this year. College will be fully funded with money left over for graduate school, if he chooses." This was how wealth was supposed to work, not as a weapon or a manipulation tool, but as a foundation for opportunity. Tommy would grow up knowing that his education was secure, but also knowing that his worth as a person wasn't measured by his bank account. That afternoon, I picked Tommy up from school and listened as he told me about his new teacher, his new friends, and the book they were reading about dragons and brave knights. Grandma, why do the knights always have to fight dragons? I don't think they always do, sweetheart. I think sometimes the dragons just need to be reminded that they're not the only powerful creatures in the kingdom. Are you a dragon or a knight? I considered this question seriously. I think maybe I'm both. A dragon who protects her treasure, and a knight who protects the people she loves. What's your treasure? You are, Tommy. You're the only treasure that really matters. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, I sat in my study writing in the journal I'd started keeping after we moved. Not a record of financial transactions or legal victories, but a record of quiet moments, small victories, and the daily accumulation of peace. Tonight's entry read: Tommy got a gold star for his math homework today. He's making friends easily, the way children do when they're not weighted down by adult anxieties about money and status. I'm teaching him to garden, and he's teaching me to see butterflies as more important than bank statements. David called again last week. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded sober, which is progress, but he was asking for money, which isn't. Jessica, according to Margaret, has moved back in with her parents and is working at a department store. They're learning what I learned 40 years ago, that survival requires building something real instead of just inheriting something that was built by someone else. I don't forgive them. Forgiveness would suggest that what they did was forgivable, and some betrayals are too calculated, too cruel, too fundamentally selfish to be excused. But I don't carry anger anymore either. Anger is heavy, and I'm 63 years old. I have better things to carry. I carry Tommy's laughter. I carry the memory of my husband's hands planting roses. I carry the satisfaction of building something that will last beyond my lifetime, not money, but values. Not inheritance, but integrity. They wanted everything I'd built. They ended up with nothing I'd created. The difference between those two things is the difference between taking and making, between inheriting and earning, between being given a legacy and being worthy of one. Tomorrow, Tommy and I are going to plant apple trees. By the time he's my age, they'll be strong enough to provide shade for his grandchildren. That's the kind of planning that matters. Not how to acquire wealth, but how to grow something worth passing on. At 63, I finally understand what my husband meant when he said the best inheritance is the one that makes the inheritor better, not just richer. Tommy will inherit money, but more importantly, he'll inherit the understanding that family means protection, not exploitation, and that love is something you earn through character, not something you claim through blood. I didn't lose a son last year. I lost the illusion that biology creates loyalty. What I gained was clarity, peace, and the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting not because you want to win, but because winning protects something precious. David and Jessica learned that when you try to bury a phoenix, you'd better make sure it's actually dead. They learned that money is like water. It flows toward those who know how to contain it and away from those who take it for granted. Most importantly, they learned that some women get more dangerous with age, not less. That wisdom is sharper than youth, experience is stronger than entitlement, and that grandmothers who've survived everything life can throw at them are not people you want as enemies. I am 63 years old. I am beautiful, dignified, and absolutely ruthless when threatened. I have raised a grandson who knows the difference between love and manipulation, built a life based on genuine affection rather than financial obligation, and created a legacy that will survive long after I'm gone. They wanted everything. I gave them exactly what they deserved. Nothing. And I sleep better at night than I have in 20 years. I closed the journal and walked upstairs to check on Tommy, who was sleeping peacefully in a room filled with books and dreams instead of schemes and disappointments. Tomorrow, we would plant those apple trees. Tomorrow, I would continue building something worth inheriting. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a house filled with love instead of calculation. At 63, I had learned the most important lesson of my life. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something so beautiful that your enemies realize they never deserved to be part of it in the first place. They had wanted my death to solve their problems. Instead, my life had become the solution to problems I didn't even know I had. I had lost a son and gained a future. I had lost an inheritance and gained a legacy. That, I thought as I turned off the lights, was the best trade I'd ever made. Thank you for joining me on Anna's incredible journey of reclaiming her power and protecting her legacy. Her story reminds us that wisdom, experience, and determination don't diminish with age. They become weapons in the hands of women who've learned to use them. If Anna's transformation has inspired you, please subscribe to her true stories and hit that notification bell. We share these experiences to show women that it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to set boundaries, and never too late to show the world exactly what you're capable of when pushed too far. And don't forget our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. It's filled with practical strategies for protecting yourself from toxic people, building unshakable boundaries, and creating a life so authentic that manipulation bounces right off it. Click the link in the description box and start your transformation today. Remember, you are never too old to start over, never too weak to fight back, and never powerless when you finally decide enough is enough. Your story isn't over, it's just getting to the good part. Until next time, keep writing your story on your own terms.